She found out on a Friday. The worst things always arrive on Fridays. Zarel was behind the bar at Crossing Tides, 40 minutes before doors opened, arranging the set list with Leora when her phone buzzed. A notification from her business email. Legal correspondence. She almost ignored it. She didn't. She read it once, then again. Then she set the phone face down on the counter very carefully, the way you set something down when your hands have started shaking and you don't want anyone to see. Zarel, Leora was watching her. What is it? Nothing. You just went the color of this wall. I said it's nothing, Leora. She picked the phone back up, read it a third time as if the words might have rearranged themselves into something less catastrophic. They hadn't. The filing was formal, precise, and devastating. A legal claim against Crossing Tides, specifically against 3 original compositions performed at the lounge, asserting that the songs fell under a production contract signed in Lagos 4 years ago, a contract that still carried one active name as co-rights holder, Emeka Osei. Leora crossed the bar in 4 steps and took the phone from her hand and read it. The silence that followed was the specific silence of someone who understands exactly what they are looking at and needs a moment before they trust themselves to speak. He's trying to take the lounge, Leora said quietly. He's trying to take the music, Zarel said. The lounge just comes with it. They looked at each other. Does Tyrion know? No, Zarel took the phone back. And he's not going to. Not yet. Zarel. This is mine to handle. Her voice was flat, final. I built this. I'm not handing it to someone else to fix. Leora opened her mouth, closed it, and then said the things Zarel didn't want to hear but already knew. You always say that, right before everything gets worse. Turn the page. If you've ever tried to fight a battle alone because asking for help felt like losing, you already understand Zarel better than she understands herself right now. Hit that like button and stay with me because this story is about to move fast. The lounge filled up that evening the way it always did on Fridays. Slowly at first, then all at once, the room finding its warmth and noise and the specific atmosphere that had made Crossing Tides the kind of place people came back to without being able to fully explain why. Zarel performed. She sang all 3 sets, every note clean, every lyric landed. Nobody in that room could have guessed that the woman at the microphone had spent the last 3 hours reading and rereading a legal document designed to dismantle everything she had built. Nobody except one person. Tyrion was at his corner table by 8. He was always there by 8. But tonight, something was different. She could feel it from the stage the way you feel a shift in temperature before you can name it. He was watching her with the particular quality of attention he used when he was not simply present, but calculating. She finished her final set. The room applauded. She stepped off the stage and went straight to the back corridor to breathe. He was there in 4 minutes. She heard the door and turned around. He was standing in the corridor with his jacket open and his eyes on her face and no preliminary. Tell me what happened, he said. Good evening to you too. Zarel, you're fine, Tyrion. It was a good set. Go enjoy. I got a notification from my legal team this afternoon, a filing against this property, against your compositions. Another step. Want to try again? She held his gaze. It's handled. It's not handled. It was filed this morning. I'm aware when it was filed. Then you're aware that you have 72 hours before it escalates to a formal injunction. His voice was still controlled, but something underneath it wasn't. Why didn't you tell me? Because it's my problem. You keep saying that. Because it keeps being true. Zarel. He stopped. The word came out differently that time. Not sharp, not authoritative, but stripped of its official register in a way that made her go very still. Who filed it? The corridor was quiet. Somewhere beyond the door, the lounge hummed with music and conversation and the clink of glasses. In here, there was just the two of them and a question she didn't want to answer. "Emeka," she said. His jaw tightened. "Your former manager and former fiancé, yes." Something moved across his face, fast, gone before she could read it fully, but she had seen it. "He's in Seoul?" Tyrion asked. "I don't know yet. I'll find out." "Tyrion, I'll find out," he said again, quiet, absolute, "and then we'll decide how to handle it, together." She looked at him. "We?" "Yes," he said it without blinking. "We." She wanted to argue. She had the argument ready, the one about self-sufficiency, about not needing to be managed, about having survived 2 years in this city on her own terms. It was a good argument. She had used it successfully on everyone who had ever tried to get too close. But he was looking at her with an expression she had no category for. Not pity, not authority, something that looked uncomfortably, dangerously like the specific way people look at things they have decided they are not willing to lose. She looked away first. "Fine," she said. "We." He nodded once, turned to leave. "Tyrion?" He stopped. "Why do you keep showing up?" she asked. The question came out quieter than she intended, almost fragile. "Every Friday, every problem. Why?" He was silent for a long moment. Then he turned back, and he looked at her the way he had looked at the city from his 38th floor window, like something worth understanding completely. "Because you matter," he said, "and I've run out of ways to pretend that's a simple thing." He left before she could respond. She stood in the corridor alone and pressed one hand flat against the wall and breathed. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number, Lagos area code. She stared at it. It rang 4 times, 5, 6. She picked up. Silence on the line. Then a voice she had spent 2 years trying to forget. Zarel. Warm, familiar, the voice of a man who had never once believed she would stop answering when he called. Her blood went cold. "How did you get this number?" she said. "I got a lot of things," Emeka said. "We should talk. I'm in Seoul." Pause right here. Would you pick up that call or would you hang up? Drop your answer in the comments and subscribe if you're not leaving this story now, because what happens next is the moment everything explodes. She didn't hang up. That was the thing she would think about afterward. Not what he said, not what she said, but the simple fact that she didn't hang up. 2 years of silence. 2 years of building walls thick enough to keep out everything his name carried. And the moment she heard his voice, she stood in that corridor with her hand against the wall, and she stayed on the line. "There's nothing to talk about, Emeka." The filing says otherwise. "The filing is harassment dressed in legal language, and you know it." He laughed. That laugh, easy, unhurried. The laugh of a man who had always known how to make you feel like you were overreacting. She had once loved that laugh. Now it landed on her like cold water. "I'm not trying to hurt you," he said. "I never wanted to hurt you." And yet, her voice came out flat. "Here we are." "Zarel." The warmth in his voice shifted slightly, more serious, more practiced. "I made mistakes, I know that, but those compositions, the ones you're performing, they were developed under a shared creative agreement. My lawyers are very clear on that." "Your lawyers are lying on your behalf, which historically is what they do." A pause. "Meet me. One conversation. If you hear what I'm proposing and you still want to fight it in court, I'll respect that. You've never respected anything that belonged to me." "The restaurant on Itaewon Row. Tomorrow, 7 o'clock. Another pause, and then, quieter, almost gentle, the voice she had been most afraid of. "I'm not going anywhere, Zarel. We can do this painfully or we can do it cleanly. That choice is yours." The line went dead. She stood in the empty corridor for a long time. Then she put the phone in her pocket and walked back into the lounge and smiled at the room and finished the evening, because that was what she did. She survived things. She always had. What she didn't do was tell Tyrion about the call. She told Leora at midnight, sitting on the floor of the lounge after the last customer left, both of them with their shoes off and cold tea in their hands. Leora listened without interrupting, which meant it was serious. Leora interrupting was as natural as breathing. When Zarel finished, Leora was quiet for 10 full seconds. "You're going to meet him," she said, not a question. "Yes." "Alone?" "Yes." "Zarel," Leora set down her cup, "that man dismantled your entire life once. He had years to do it. He knows exactly which buttons to press and in which order, and he will sit across from you in that restaurant and he will press all of them." "I know. And you're still going." "I need to look at him," Zarel said quietly. "I need to sit across from him and know that he cannot touch me anymore, not legally, not emotionally, not in any way that matters." She paused. "I've been afraid of that conversation for 2 years. I'm done being afraid of it." Leora looked at her for a long moment. "Tell Tyrion," she said. "Not yet." "Zarel." "After. I'll tell him after. I need to do this one thing by myself first. Just this one thing." Leora didn't argue, but the look on her face said everything the argument would have said. She arrived at the restaurant 7 minutes early. She had chosen her outfit deliberately. Not armor exactly, but close. Something that said, "I am not the woman you left in pieces." Something that said, "Look at what survived you." Emeka was already there. He stood when he saw her. Of course he did. Emeka had always had impeccable manners, which was part of how he had operated for so long without being seen clearly. He was older, sharper at the edges, the kind of handsome that had started to carry its own weight. He smiled, and the smile was exactly as she remembered it, warm, certain, slightly too wide. "You look incredible," he said. "Sit down, Emeka." He sat. She sat. The waiter appeared, and she ordered water, and Emeka ordered wine, and the waiter left, and they looked at each other across a table in Seoul, and 2 years of silence sat between them like a third person. "You built something real here," he said. "The lounge is—" "Why are you here?" He paused, recalibrated. "The filing is a threat. We both know that. So skip the performance and tell me what you actually want." Something shifted in his expression. The warmth dialed back slightly and something more honest replaced it. Not kindness, but at least accuracy. "The compositions you're performing," he said, 3 of them were developed during our professional partnership. My legal team has documented evidence of collaborative sessions, studio bookings, production logs. Those are my songs, Emeka. I wrote every word of every one of them. In studios I booked, with producers I paid for, under a partnership agreement that you voided," she said, "when you stole my earnings, forged my signature on 3 separate contracts, and then paid people to bury my name in the industry." Her voice was still level. She had promised herself level. "Don't talk to me about partnership agreements." His jaw moved. "I'm willing to drop the filing." She waited. "In exchange for a co-writing credit on the 3 compositions, 15% of performance royalties going forward, and," he paused, "a conversation about the new project I'm developing. I need a voice like yours, Zarel. I always did." The restaurant was quiet around them, soft lighting, other couples at other tables having entirely normal evenings. Outside the window, Seoul moved in its relentless way. She looked at him, at this man who had taken everything and was now sitting across from her offering a fraction of it back like a favor. "No," she said. "Zarel, no." She placed both hands flat on the table, steady. "Not 15%, not 5%, not a conversation, not a credit, not one more minute of anything that belongs to me." She leaned forward slightly. "You took 2 years from me. I'm not giving you one more minute, not one." His expression hardened. Then we go to court, and courts take time and money and attention, all of which will be directed at your lounge and your reputation while the case runs. I've done this before, Zarel. You know how it ends." "Yes," she said, "I do know how it ends." She stood up. "It ends with you losing, because this time I'm not alone." She left without looking back. She made it to the end of the block before her legs stopped being reliable. She stood at the corner with the city noise around her and one hand on a lamppost and breathed. In, out, her chest tight, her eyes burning with the specific heat of tears she refused to allow. She had said it. She had sat across from the thing that had broken her, and she had said no, and she had stood up, and she had left. She pulled out her phone. She called Tyrion. He picked up on the second ring. Zarel. Just her name, but the way he said it, alert, immediate, like a man who had been waiting, undid something in her. "I need to tell you something," she said. "I should have told you last night." A pause. "Where are you?" She told him the street corner, the restaurant name. Another pause. Shorter. "Don't move." He arrived in 11 minutes. He came around the corner on foot, jacket open, no tie, the most undone she had ever seen him, and he scanned the street until he found her and crossed to her directly without slowing down and stopped in front of her and looked at her face and said nothing for a moment. Then he was here. He asked me to meet him. She held his gaze. I went alone. "I know you're angry." "I'm not angry." His voice was tight. "Tell me what happened." She told him everything, the filing, the call, the meeting, what Emeka had offered and what she had said. She told it cleanly and completely, and when she finished, Tyrion was very still in the way he got still when something had moved past his outer layer and reached something deeper. "You went alone," he said. "I needed to." "Zarel." He took one step closer, close enough that she had to look up slightly to hold his gaze. "I understand why. I understand wanting to face something yourself, but if you had told me—" "I know. I would have—" "I know, Tyrion." Her voice cracked slightly on his name, just slightly. "That's why I didn't tell you, because I knew you would come, and I needed to know I could do it without you coming." The street was quiet around them. A couple walked past. A scooter turned the corner. He looked at her for a long moment. "Could you," he asked quietly, "do it without me?" She thought about the lamppost, her unreliable legs, the tears she hadn't allowed. "Yes," she said, "but I didn't want to." Something in his face changed completely. He reached out and took her hand. Not a gesture, not a performance, just his hand around hers, firm and warm and certain on a street corner in Itaewon on a Saturday night. "Then don't," he said. "Not anymore." She looked down at their hands, then back up at him, and for the first time in 2 years, she didn't pull away. His lawyers moved on Monday. Not the filing, something worse, a press release. Carefully worded, strategically timed, sent to 3 Korean entertainment blogs and 2 Nigerian music outlets simultaneously at 9 in the morning. Producer and talent manager Emeka Ose confirms ongoing legal proceedings regarding intellectual property dispute with former artist. Full statement to follow. No names, just enough. By 10:15, it had been picked up by a Korean entertainment aggregator with the headline, "African Music Lounge in Itaewon at Center of Copyright Dispute." By 11, it had 1,700 shares. Zarel saw it on her phone in the middle of a strategy briefing on the 38th floor. She read it once, put the phone face down on the table, continued the briefing for exactly 4 more minutes before Tyrion, who had been watching her since her expression changed, held up one hand and stopped the meeting. "Give us the room," he said. His team filed out without a word. The door closed. Silence. "Show me," he said. She slid the phone across the table. He read it. His face remained completely still. The specific stillness that she had learned over months meant the opposite of calm. "He did this to draw you out," she said. "If I respond publicly, it confirms the story. If I don't respond, it looks like guilt." "I know what he did." "Tyrion, my legal team will issue a counterstatement within the hour. Simultaneously, we file for dismissal on the original claim. I had my lawyers reviewing the contract documents all weekend. The co-rights assertion has 3 procedural defects. It won't survive a formal challenge." She stared at him. "You've been working on this since Saturday night?" He looked at her with an expression that said, "Of course I have. What exactly did you think I was doing?" "You should have told me," he said. "You needed one night without it," he said simply. Something moved through her chest, warm and complicated and slightly terrifying. "Tyrion," she leaned forward, "this is going to get messier before it gets clean. Emeka doesn't stop. I know him. When he can't win the thing he's actually after, he starts burning the surrounding landscape." She paused. "I don't want that fire reaching you or your company." "Let me worry about my company." "I'm serious." "So am I." He stood, crossed to the window, his window, the one that looked out over all of Seoul like a responsibility. He stood there for a moment with his back to her. "Do you know what I thought about the night of the gala, when I heard you sing?" The shift in direction caught her off guard. "What?" "I thought, whoever taught that voice to be small did something unforgivable." He turned around. "I didn't know who had done it then. I do now." His eyes found hers across the room. "And I am not interested in protecting myself from the consequences of standing between you and him. Am I clear?" The room was very quiet. "You can't," started. "Zarel, one word, absolute. Am I clear?" She held his gaze for a long moment. "Yes," she said quietly. He nodded once, turned back to the window. "Good," he said. "Now, the counterstatement. I need you to approve the language before we release it. It goes out under both our names." She froze. "Both our names?" "Yes." "Tyrion, if your name is on a public statement about this, it becomes a corporate story. The board answers to me." He turned back around. Something in his face was different now, resolved in a way that had moved past professional into something more personal and more deliberate. "And I decide what carries my name. This does." She didn't have an answer for that. She wasn't sure one existed. The counterstatement ran at noon, clean, precise, 4 paragraphs that systematically dismantled the legal basis of the filing and ended with a single sentence that every outlet picked up and ran in their headline. "Crossing Tides and its founder stand on unambiguous legal and creative ground. This matter will be resolved accordingly." By 2 o'clock, Emeka's press contact had gone silent. By 4, Leora called. "Have you seen the comments on the lounges page?" "I've been avoiding my phone." "Don't avoid it. People are rallying. Someone started a hashtag, Crossing Tides Stands. It has 40,000 posts." A pause. "Also, someone found Emeka's Lagos court records from 3 years ago, and they are not flattering." Zarel closed her eyes. "Leora." "I'm not saying I sent them anything. I'm saying information finds its own way." A beat. "He's losing the public narrative, Zarel. Whatever he tries next, he's doing it from a weakened position." She exhaled. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Thank the man whose name is on that statement." Leora's voice shifted, quieter, more serious. "Zarel, he put his name on it. Do you understand what that means for a man like him? That isn't a business decision." "I know," Zarel said softly. "Do you really? Because you have a habit of understanding things intellectually and then running from them emotionally, and I really need you not to do that this time." "Good night, Leora." "I need you not to do that this." She hung up, sat in the quiet of her office for a moment, Then she picked up her bag and walked to the 38th floor. Tyrion's office was empty except for him. No team, no Jae-won. 7 in the evening and he was still at his desk with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled and documents spread across the surface in the organized chaos of a man who had been working without stopping. He looked up when she entered. She closed the door behind her, crossed the room, stopped in front of his desk. "Why did you put your name on it?" she asked. He leaned back in his chair. "I already told you." Not the official answer, the real one. A long silence. He stood up slowly, came around the desk and stopped in front of her, closer than the 38th floor usually allowed, and looked at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Unguarded, completely. "Because I am tired of watching you fight alone and pretending that's acceptable to me." Her breath caught. "Because every time you walk onto that stage and sing." He stopped. His jaw tightened. Something was costing him. She could see it costing him. "Every time I sit at that table and hear your voice, I think about what almost didn't exist, what he almost erased." His voice dropped. "And I cannot sit in that corner one more Friday and pretend I'm just someone who believes in your talent." "Tyrion." "I'm not finished." His eyes stayed on hers, dark, certain. "The Yoon Group board approved a reconciliation 3 months ago. My family hasn't forgiven me. My directors think I've lost perspective." He paused. "They're right. I have. And I would lose it again." She stared at him. "The reconciliation? Shin Yu Na?" It was a strategic arrangement. It made sense on paper. His voice was quiet. "But there was someone sitting at a microphone in Itaewon every Friday, and she had no idea what she was doing to every careful, rational decision I had ever made." The office was silent around them. Seoul spread its lights beyond the window, indifferent, magnificent, entirely unaware. Her eyes were burning. She refused to blink. "You never said anything," she whispered. "You weren't ready to hear it." "How do you know I'm ready now?" He reached up slowly. His hand found her face, one palm against her cheek, careful and deliberate, the touch of a man who had thought about this and made a decision and was not uncertain about it. "Are you ready?" he asked quietly. She couldn't speak. So she did the thing she had not done in 2 years, the thing that required more courage than any walking onto any stage, more bravery than facing Emeka at a restaurant table, more strength than anything the last 2 years had demanded of her. She leaned into his hand, just that, just slightly, a centimeter of movement that said everything words were too small to carry. His eyes closed briefly. When they opened, they were different. Something released in them, something that had been held for a long time. "I didn't save you," he said, low, certain, the words landing like something he had been carrying and was finally setting down. Her breath left her completely, and then his phone rang. They both went still. It rang again. He didn't move. His hand stayed on her face, and his eyes stayed on hers, and the phone rang a 3rd time. Then Jae-won's voice came through the office intercom, apologetic, urgent, impossible to ignore. "Chairman, I'm sorry to interrupt. It's urgent. Mr. Emeka Osei is in the building lobby. He's requesting to see Ms. Adebayo." A pause. "He says if she won't come down, he'll make a statement to the press contact he has waiting outside." The moment shattered. Tyrion's hand dropped from her face slowly. His expression closed back over, not cold, but controlled, the chairman reassembling over the man. He straightened his shirt, reached for his jacket. "He wants a stage," he said quietly. "We won't give him one." He looked at her. "Go home. I'll handle." "No." She picked up her bag. "I told you before. Some things I handle myself." She met his eyes. "But this time, come with me." Something moved across his face. Then he nodded, and they both walked to the elevator together. And for the first time since this story began, Zarel Adebayo was not walking towards something difficult alone. The elevator doors opened. She stepped in. He stepped in beside her. The doors closed. And what Emeka did when those lobby doors opened, what he said, what he revealed, what he had been holding back this entire time, changes everything. Subscribe right now, because part 3 is where this story becomes something neither of them can come back from, and you do not want to miss it.